Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." Those words cut deeper than any blade, spoken not by a stranger, but by the very blood I once trusted most. In that moment, the floor of my life gave way. Home, family, and dignity, all ripped from me in the space of a single breath. But betrayal has a strange way of igniting something stronger than despair. What began as the cruelest wound of my life turned into the fire that reshaped everything I thought I knew about loyalty, justice, and survival. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I've lived in Duluth, Minnesota for almost 7 decades, and the winters here have always had their way of reminding a man just how small he really is. At 68, I wake up each morning to the sound of my furnace groaning against the lake wind and the smell of pine logs crackling in the stove. My little wooden house is nothing fancy, but every inch of it carries my mark. I built the porch rail with my own hands, patched the roof after every storm, and carved the trim around the windows so that even in January, when the snow piles up like a second wall, the place looks like it belongs. 3 years ago, my wife passed, and the silence she left behind still sits heavy in every room. She was the reason I strung Christmas lights even when my knees complained, the reason cinnamon still lingers in the air each December, and the reason I kept her chair by the fire untouched. I keep one stocking for her, though I know it will never be filled again. Old habits die harder than old men, I suppose. I've never been rich, but I never measured my life in dollars. I taught shop class at the local high school for years, showing kids how to handle tools, respect wood, and understand the value of patience. When I retired, I stayed busy. I build shelves for neighbors, mend chairs for the church, and teach boys at the youth group how to square a corner joint. My life has been plain, but it's been honest. My son Evan is 36 now. He used to be the kind of boy who followed me around the workshop, eyes wide as I guided his small hands around a plane or a hammer. Somewhere along the way, he traded sawdust for screens, startups, apps, new technologies. He's been chasing fortune in one scheme after another. Each time, the money vanished, but his promises never did. For a while now, he's been living above my garage, calling it a temporary situation while he positioned himself for the next big opportunity. He is clever, there's no denying it. His wife, Ivy, carries herself like someone who already lives in a higher tax bracket, though I know the only thing higher is the pile of bills waiting to be paid. I have always hoped Evan would settle down, find some steadiness in work or family, but I've seen too many restless men to confuse ambition with direction. Years back, when Evan begged for help with one of his ventures, I agreed to transfer ownership of my lakeside cabin into his LLC. He promised it would make borrowing easier, said I could always come and go as I pleased, and at the time it seemed harmless. The cabin was my wife's favorite place, where we fished in summer and watched the ice crack in spring. I signed the papers without hesitation. It was family after all. What trouble could come of it? Neighbors warned me that paperwork is as permanent as nails in oak. They said once property leaves your name, getting it back is like uncarving wood. I laughed it off, told them that trust was the glue that kept families together. Looking back, I wonder if I was naive, or just unwilling to see my own son as anything but the boy who once built birdhouses beside me. Now, with the snow falling and thick curtains outside, I strung up the Christmas lights one more time. The bulbs glowed against the frost, painting the porch in warm colors that fought against the dark. Inside, the fire hummed, and the smell of gingerbread hung in the kitchen. I set a chair beside the hearth, just where my wife used to sit, and I hung 2 stockings on the mantel, one for her and one for Evan. I told myself that no matter what had changed, family was family. Christmas was still Christmas. There had to be a place where father and son could sit together, even if our lives had wandered far apart. I believed that the roof I built with my hands would always have room for him. But in the quiet of that night, as I looked around at the house I had carved out of Visserum, Sav winters and years, a thought pressed against me like the weight of snow on the eaves. I remembered the cabin, the signatures, the LLC, and the smug way Evan brushed off questions about it. I remembered the neighbors who said paper outlasts blood. I tightened my grip on the arm of my chair and told myself not to worry. I told myself trust was enough. Yet deep down, beneath the warmth of the fire and the comfort of old rituals, a small voice whispered that trust can be broken, that paper can turn against you, and that even sons can see inheritance before they see fathers. I didn't know it then, but a single signature I had scrawled years earlier was about to decide my winter. I thought I had built a life too solid to crumble. I was wrong. If you're still watching and want to know how one ordinary Christmas turned into the darkest night of my life, comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to point number 2. Christmas Eve is supposed to be a night of warmth, yet that year the cold seemed to seep straight through my bones. I had just finished laying out gingerbread on the counter and stoking the fire when I heard the crunch of tires in the snow. Evan and Ivy swept in like they owned the place, brushing flakes from their designer coats, their faces glowing with excitement. Evan's voice filled the room before he even shut the door, loud and triumphant. "Dad, you're looking at a man who just closed an $18 million deal." His words cracked like fireworks in the quiet of my modest living room. For a moment, I allowed myself a smile. After years of watching my boy stumble from one failed venture to another, I thought maybe this was finally his turn to stand steady. He spoke fast, pacing the rug, describing cash and stock, escrow accounts, and projections. Ivy stood behind him, arms folded, her smile tight, eyes scanning the room like she was already imagining it redecorated. I clapped his shoulder, told him I was proud, and tried to believe that maybe things were turning around for him. But joy has a way of curdling quickly. Evan pulled a manila folder from his leather bag, slid it across my table as if presenting a gift. "There's just a little housekeeping we need to take care of," he said. Inside were documents titled Vacancy Agreement and Temporary Transfer. My stomach knotted before I even read the lines. He explained in that rapid-fire tone he uses when he doesn't want to be interrupted. The investors needed everything clean. No lingering family members and properties tied to the company. No emotional encumbrances. Ivy's voice came softer, almost soothing, but carried a cold edge. She said media perception mattered, that it wouldn't look good if an elderly father was still occupying a house or cabin listed under Evan's LLC. "You know how cruel headlines can be, Tom," she murmured, as if she were sparing me some public humiliation. I stared at the pages, words swimming. The cabin was in there, the very place where my wife and I had watched summer sunsets and winter storms. I reminded Evan that it was my home, that I'd built it with my hands and memories, not spreadsheets. His expression hardened, the triumphant glow dimming into something steely. "Actually, Dad, it's company property now. I've let you stay out of kindness, but the deal closes next week. It's time you found your own place." The sentence hit harder than any winter wind. I heard the echo of his childhood laugh, the boy who once begged me to let him use a chisel. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who now called my life's work an inconvenience. I muttered that surely this was some mistake. He shook his head. "No mistake. It's business." Ivy slid a keycard across the table, as if that settled everything. "We've arranged a motel off the highway. 2 nights, already paid. It'll give you space while you adjust." She said it the way someone might recommend a decent diner. I looked at the card, then at her polished nails, and wondered when compassion had turned into a transaction. My throat felt tight. "And Christmas?" I asked. Evan checked his watch as though I were making him late. "We'll be busy. Investors are flying in. This is bigger than a holiday dinner, Dad." The room, once alive with cinnamon and firelight, now felt hollow. I gathered my old tool bag, the same one I'd carried for 40 years, and tucked inside the framed photo of my wife that sat on the mantel. Evan and Ivy stood by the door, impatient, like hosts waiting for an unwanted guest to leave. Snow swirled outside, and the porch lights I had strung glowed faintly in the dark. As I stepped into the night, the cold bit into my skin sharper than ever before. My boots crunched on the frozen path, each step echoing like a verdict. I turned once to see the outline of the house, the place I had built, lit up for Christmas yet emptied of its meaning. They watched from the doorway, silhouettes against the warmth, while I trudged toward the car waiting to take me to a rented room. I thought of my wife's chair by the fire, of the stockings I had hung, and of the foolish hope that Christmas would still bind us together. Instead, I was being cast out like clutter in a clean transaction. I gripped the tool bag harder, my knuckles stiff with cold and grief. Somewhere deep inside, a voice told me this wasn't just cruelty, it was betrayal. I didn't know it then, but the deal Evan bragged about wasn't as solid as he believed. Paperwork has a way of unraveling when truth slips in. 3 days later, the same son who had dismissed me as a liability would find himself on his knees, begging me to save the very future he thought I could only ruin. If you're still here and starting to feel the sting of betrayal as I did, drop number 2 in the comments so I know you're following closely. Now, let's uncover point number 3. Christmas night in a budget motel is nothing like the scenes you see on greeting cards. The Sunset Lodge smelled of bleach and stale smoke, its walls thin enough that I could hear a couple arguing 2 rooms over. The fluorescent light above the sink buzzed like an angry wasp, and the radiator coughed without warmth. I sat on the sagging mattress with my tool bag at my feet and the photograph of my wife balanced carefully on the nightstand. The gingerbread box rested in my lap. I opened it, broke off a piece, then put the lid back on after setting 1 cookie aside, the way I always used to for Evan. Habit is a cruel companion when the person you save it for no longer cares. Morning brought no cheer. Snow caked the bus stop outside, and I stood in it clutching my papers in a wooden box I had built decades ago. It was the one thing I still trusted to protect the documents of my life. With stiff fingers, I counted out enough bills for a bus ticket downtown. I wasn't going to waste another day pretending this was a misunderstanding. My wife used to say, "Paper is the skeleton of kindness. It holds the body up." I finally understood what she meant. The ride was long, but by mid-morning I pushed open the glass door of the county's legal aid office. Behind a desk piled with case files sat Nora Patel. She couldn't have been more than 35, with sharp eyes and a voice that carried both authority and compassion. She welcomed me in, listened without rushing, and asked to see everything I had. I laid the box on her desk and opened it. There were deeds, tax receipts, and the original transfer agreement for the cabin. Nora flipped through them, her brow tightening as she read. She paused at one particular document. "Mr. Whitaker, when did you sign this quitclaim deed?" she asked. I frowned. I never did. The paper declared that I had relinquished my right to occupy the cabin, dated just 6 weeks prior, stamped by a notary seal. My stomach turned cold. The signature looked like mine, but I knew my own hand. The loops were wrong, the pressure uneven. Nora leaned back. "This isn't just sloppy paperwork. This is forgery. And given your age, it qualifies as elder abuse." She explained in calm but firm tones that what Evan and Ivy had done could be prosecuted. My chest burned with anger and shame. To think my own child would stoop this low. She suggested we head straight to the county recorder's office to verify the document. The snow had picked up again, powder swirling around our boots as we walked the courthouse steps. Inside, Recorder Briggs adjusted his glasses and pulled up the notary information on his screen. He shook his head slowly. "This seal belongs to a notary whose license was revoked months ago." He tapped the desk. "That's not a valid deed. Whoever filed this committed fraud." My fists clenched. For years I had trusted Evan, and now here I was being told in front of strangers that my son had effectively erased me from my own home with a lie. Nora placed a steady hand on my arm. "We're not done. You need to file with Adult Protective Services immediately. This isn't just about property. It's about your right to live without being forced out." The words stung. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who needed protection from his family. Still, I followed her back through the snow to the APS office. The form was long, and my hands trembled as I wrote. When the pen scratched across the page, I realized it was the first time I had ever put into writing that my own son had harmed me. It felt like chiseling words into stone. Deputy Carla Ruiz met us there, a broad-shouldered woman with a calm expression. She took notes, asked for copies of the documents, and promised to pull footage from a neighbor's door camera that might show who delivered the forged deed for filing. She gave me her direct number, told me I wasn't alone, and assured me the county had seen cases like this before. That night, back in the motel, I set the phone beside my bed and stared at the number she had written. I dialed Evan twice, but he didn't pick up. Minutes later, Ivy texted, "Everything's out of our hands now. It's too big for family talk. Think of the investors." My chest tightened. To her, I wasn't a father. I was a risk factor, an obstacle in a spreadsheet. The radiator still coughed without heat. I sat in the half-light of that miserable room and understood something important. Christmas had stripped away the illusions. My son didn't see me as family anymore. He saw me as baggage. But with Nora and Deputy Ruiz on my side, I realized the fight was only beginning. The snow outside wasn't just falling. It was a drumbeat, marking the start of a battle I hadn't chosen but couldn't ignore. If you're still with me and can sense the storm building, type number 3 below so I know you're watching closely. Now, let's push into point number 4. I've always been a man who believed that problems could be settled by looking another person in the eye. My first instinct wasn't to march into a courtroom, but to sit across a table and talk it through. That was why, 2 mornings after Christmas, I called Pastor Jim at the church and asked if I could use his office. He didn't ask for details, only said the door would be open. The old stone building smelled of cedar polish and candle wax, and I hoped its walls might soften hearts that had grown hard. I left a message for Evan suggesting we meet there. My words were simple. We needed to talk as father and son. Hours passed with no reply. By evening, he sent back only a vague text about being too busy with investors. It was clear he had no interest in reconciliation. The next day, I found an email waiting in my inbox. The letterhead belonged to a corporate attorney representing Martin Decker, the investor behind Evan's deal. The tone was polished, but cold. It demanded release of occupancy and offered a relocation stipend as a sign of good faith. I read it 3 times, trying to believe my son hadn't had a hand in this, but every line screamed of Evan's fingerprints. They wanted me to sign away every right I had in exchange for a check that wouldn't even buy half a year's groceries. I printed the email and carried it to Nora Patel's office. She studied the pages, shaking her head. "They're trying to make you disappear quietly," she said. "But you have leverage. You've invested labor and materials in that cabin. You replaced the roof, installed the heating system, and those are compensable. You can file a mechanic's lien. It won't give you ownership back, but it ties the property up legally until you're paid. No buyer wants an encumbered asset." Her words lit something inside me. For decades, I had built things with my hands, shaping wood into something that lasted. Maybe this was no different, just another structure to shore up, another wall to reinforce. "Let's do it," I told her. We filed the paperwork that afternoon, the lien attaching itself like a stubborn nail to the cabin Evan thought he could sell out from under me. Nora didn't stop there. She helped me prepare a formal report for Adult Protective Services, this time with every detail spelled out. The forged quitclaim, the forced removal, the fraudulent notary. Each sentence I signed felt like another board nailed into place, building a shelter of truth around me. Then we drafted a notice of dispute addressed directly to the M&A firm. Nora found the term sheet online and highlighted the clause requiring clear title for closing. With the lien filed and an APS complaint pending, clear title was impossible. By evening, I returned to my motel, exhausted but strangely steady. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt like I had tools in my hands again. Not hammers or chisels, but the kind of instruments that could cut through deceit. I laid my head down, ready to rest. That same night, word filtered back in ways small but sharp. A neighbor texted me that Evan had taken Ivy out for a celebratory steak dinner. When he handed over his card to pay, it was declined. Apparently, the accounts tied to the company had already been flagged. The story went that Ivy slammed her napkin on the table and stormed out, leaving Evan scrambling to cover the bill. I didn't smile at the news, but I couldn't deny the quiet justice of it. Actions were finally pressing back against arrogance. I sat by the motel window, watching the snowflakes spiral under the streetlight. My phone glowed in my hand, and for a long while I debated what to write. In the end, I sent only one short message: "Come to me, tell me everything." I didn't know if he would respond, but I knew something had shifted. I was no longer a helpless old man cast aside at Christmas. The lien, the APS filing, the notice, all of it had wedged itself into the gears of his $18 million machine. For the first time in years, the balance of power wasn't entirely in Evan's hands. The snow outside grew thicker, layering the streets in silence. My wife once told me that winter is when you discover what kind of fire you can build. As I closed the curtains, I realized my fire was finally catching. The battle was no longer about sentiment. It was about survival, about dignity, about proving that even an old carpenter still knew how to brace a house when the storm came. If you're still watching and realizing how deep this deception really goes, leave a number 4 in the comments so I can see you're still by my side. Now let's move to point number 5. The church was quiet except for the faint hum of the furnace in the basement. Candles flickered in the sanctuary beyond, but inside Pastor Jim's office the light was sharp and clinical. He had given us the space, stepping out with a promise to remain nearby. I sat at the head of the table, my hands folded, the lines in my palms deeper than ever. Across from me, Evan shifted in his chair, his eyes bloodshot. Ivy sat beside him, staring down at her phone like she could text her way out of the room. The door opened, and Martin Decker entered with 2 attorneys in tow. He was tall, pressed into a suit that looked like it cost more than my truck, carrying himself with the ease of a man who believed money solved everything. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he set a thick stack of papers on the table with a deliberate thud. One of the lawyers slid the first document toward me. "Mr. Whitaker, we'll need you to sign a release of lien and a waiver of occupancy claims. Once that's done, the transaction can close smoothly. In return, we're prepared to offer you a stipend for relocation." The paper stared back at me like a loaded trap. I glanced at Evan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My jaw tightened. This house, that cabin, they're not assets to be cleared. They're my life. My wife and I built those walls. You think you can erase that with a check? Decker leaned forward, voice smooth but cold. "Timing is critical. Investors are watching. A clean transaction means confidence in the market. If you stall this deal, you're jeopardizing not only your son's future, but an entire team of employees." His words were meant to guilt me, but all I felt was the cold weight of the season pressing harder. "You ever lived through a Minnesota winter without a roof over your head?" I asked. "You ever seen an old man freeze because he was forced out of his home? My wife's laughter still lives in those walls, and you're asking me to sign it away like trash on the curb." One of the attorneys adjusted his tie and spoke in a clipped tone. "If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to highlight certain aspects of your past. A DUI from the 80s, for example. Not flattering material if the press digs it up. It would tarnish your credibility." Pastor Jim, lingering near the doorway, cleared his throat. A gentle but firm sound that cut through the threat. Beside me, Nora Patel clicked her pen and set her phone face up on the table, recording. "Are you threatening my client with character assassination?" she asked, her voice sharp as steel. I steadied my breathing, then pulled a folder from my bag. "You want credibility?" I said. I laid down copies of my real signature next to the forged one on the quitclaim deed. The loops and slants were different enough for any fool to see. Next, I placed an email printout confirming an appointment with the notary, whose license had been revoked months ago. Finally, I produced a USB stick and slid it across the table. Video from a neighbor's door camera. The person who dropped off those documents wasn't a notary. He wasn't even close. For the first time, Ivy looked up, her face pale. Evan's breathing grew shallow, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of his own lies had finally landed. Decker's polished mask cracked just slightly, his lips pressing into a thin line. He reached for the papers, then stopped, sighing through his nose. Perhaps there's another way to resolve this. Something more private. His voice was softer now, almost conciliatory. I leaned back, my chair creaking against the old wood floor. Private means buried. You want me to pretend none of this happened. But I've been silent too long already. My son forged my name, drove me from my home, and tried to cash out on a lie. I'm not signing anything that hides that truth. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel like a wall. The attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. Evan rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath. Ivy clutched her phone like it might save her. The candles outside flickered as if stirred by a draft. I thought of my wife's voice, steady and kind, reminding me that dignity is the one possession no one can steal. I turned to Nora. Let the police and APS handle it. If these gentlemen want to argue further, they can do it in front of a judge. No one spoke. The church, with all its quiet weight, seemed to hold the moment still. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in that room knew it. The motel window rattled with each gust of wind, snowflakes plastering themselves against the glass before sliding down in crooked streaks. I sat in the dim light, the radiator hissing like an old man wheezing in his sleep, and thought about the silence that had followed me from the church. My hands still trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what I had seen. My son, hunched and hollow-eyed, willing to let strangers threaten his father for the sake of a deal. For most of my life, choices had been simple. Do the work right or do it twice. Build a house sturdy or watch it collapse. But now, I stood at a crossroads where neither path looked steady. If I yielded, I'd keep peace in name only and lose everything. My cabin, my dignity, the last tether to my wife's memory. If I stood firm, I'd drag Evan and Ivy into the storm of law, expose them to charges that could stain their lives forever. My heart clenched at the thought of watching my son in handcuffs. Near midnight, my phone buzzed across the nightstand. Evan's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But blood ties have a way of pulling you back, even when reason tells you to cut loose. I answered. His voice was shaky, lower than I'd ever heard it. Dad, please, you've got to stop this. Just pull the lien, withdraw the complaint. I'll cut you in when the money clears. You won't want for anything again. I let his words settle, like dust on an empty floor. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't acknowledging the betrayal. He was bargaining, as if I were just another creditor to be bought off. You still don't get it, I said quietly. He started to protest, but I ended the call. The silence afterward felt heavier than the snow outside. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling stained yellow from years of neglect. My wife's voice came to me, as clear as if she were sitting beside me. Don't let trust become a shackle, Tom. Love is a gift, not a leash. She had said that the week before she passed, her hand small and fragile in mine. I realized now she'd seen the danger long before I had. Two roads stretched before me. One led to compromise, sign the papers, accept the stipend, and slip quietly into obscurity while Evan and Ivy grew rich off lies. The other led to confrontation. Follow Nora's guidance, present the forged documents, and let justice do what fathers sometimes can't. I closed my eyes, weighing both, but deep down, I already knew the answer. A man who has spent his life building strong frames doesn't leave rot in the wood. I reached for my phone again, typed a message with steady hands. If you want to save yourself, you confess. Take responsibility. Otherwise, I'll keep going. This ends in court, not in silence. I pressed send. There was no reply, and I didn't expect one. Minutes later, another call came, this time from Nora. Her tone was brisk but carried a thread of triumph. The judge approved a search warrant. The county investigators are pulling financial records from Evans LLC tomorrow morning. I thanked her, though the words felt strange on my tongue. Gratitude and grief rarely sit together comfortably. When the call ended, I walked to the window. Outside, red and blue lights flashed faintly down the street, patrol cars pushing slowly through the storm. The glow seeped through the snow like a warning and a promise. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, but also steadier. I thought about how my son had once looked to me for direction, and how now he would face a judge instead. I rested my hand on the glass, feeling the chill seep into my palm. My own family turned me into a defendant, I whispered to the empty room, but now they'll be the ones answering to justice. The snow fell harder, muffling the world, as if even the night itself wanted to witness what was coming. If you're still watching and can feel the weight of this impossible choice, comment number 5 below to show you're still here with me. Now, let's step into point number 6. The storm had slowed by morning, but the air still carried that sharp bite that makes every breath sting. From the motel window, I watched the city plows carve paths through the drifts, orange lights flashing in the gray dawn. My phone buzzed with a message from Nora. Search is underway. They're inside the office now. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, imagining what that scene must look like. Uniformed deputies stepping into the glossy suite Evan once bragged about. Cardboard boxes filling with files, hard drives bagged and tagged. By noon, the news hit the local station. A reporter stood outside Evan's office building, scarf whipping in the wind, microphone pressed to her mouth. Behind her, investigators carried boxes of documents into unmarked vans. The banner across the bottom of the screen read, "Business under investigation for fraud allegations." My chest tightened. That was my son they were talking about. The boy who once spent afternoons in my workshop making crooked picture frames for his mother was now reduced to a headline about fraud. Later footage showed Evan himself trying to leave the building. Cameras swarmed, microphones shoved into his face. He muttered, "No comment," eyes darting like a hunted animal. Beside him, Ivy's mask finally cracked. She snapped at the reporters, blaming corporate rivals for planting lies, then turned on Evan in the middle of the sidewalk. The microphone picked up her words. "This is your mess, Evan. You dragged me into this." The clip replayed across every local channel before dinner. By evening, it was trending online, strangers dissecting their marriage like vultures circling roadkill. I sat in the motel's threadbare chair, watching it all unfold on the buzzing television. A strange cocktail churned in my chest. Grief, guilt, and yes, something like relief. Grief because no father dreams of seeing his child humiliated on live TV. Guilt because part of me still wondered if there had been a gentler way to protect what was mine. And relief because for the first time since Christmas Eve, the truth had air. I wasn't crazy, wasn't helpless, wasn't the old man they tried to shove into the shadows. That evening, Deputy Ruiz called. Her tone was professional, clipped, but not without sympathy. "Mr. Whitaker, I wanted you to hear it from me. The DA is reviewing charges, fraud, forgery, elder abuse, all serious. If the evidence holds, your son could be looking at felony counts." The words sat heavy, like bricks stacked on my chest. I managed to ask about Ivy. If we find she helped conceal documents or benefited knowingly, she could face charges too. But right now, Evan is the main target. I thanked her, my voice rough. After hanging up, I stared at my hands. These were the same hands that once guided Evans when he was learning to hold a saw. Now those memories felt like echoes from a world that no longer existed. The ripples spread quickly. A contractor who had worked on Evans' so-called projects came forward, claiming unpaid invoices. An old employee told the press about misused investment funds. What began as a father's fight for his home was spiraling into a full-blown financial scandal. The deal Evan had celebrated was now locked in escrow, frozen until the courts decided what was real and what was fraud. That night, I walked through the snow to the church. The doors were open, candles flickering inside. I knelt in the back pew, the wood cold beneath my palms. I didn't pray for Evan's freedom. I wasn't sure I could. Instead, I prayed for clarity, for the strength to carry the weight of both truth and blood. Pastor Jim passed by, gave a quiet nod, but didn't speak. Some silences are kinder than words. When I stepped back outside, the sky had turned a shade of iron gray, snowflakes swirling like ash. I looked up, felt them sting my cheeks, and whispered into the frozen air. Sometimes justice doesn't save family, but maybe it can save what's left of me. I stood there for a long while until the cold reached through my coat and into my bones. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. The storm had shifted. Evan and Ivy would face the law, and I would face the ache of knowing blood doesn't always mean loyalty. The road ahead would be long, but at least I was no longer walking it in silence. The days after the raid felt eerily quiet, as though the storm had passed but left a hollow sky behind it. For weeks, my life had been filled with tension, phone calls from lawyers, and the gnawing fear of being cast aside. Now that the courts and investigators had stepped in, I should have felt lighter. Instead, I sat in my old recliner and felt the weight of silence pressing down on me. Justice might have been on my side, but no court order could mend the sight of my only son being led into custody. When APS confirmed my right to return to the cabin, I drove there slowly, the tires crunching on the frozen gravel road. The place stood waiting, quiet beneath a blanket of snow. The sight of it twisted something inside me, relief that it was still mine, sorrow that I had almost lost it to betrayal. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and breathed in the faint smell of cedar logs and cold air. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't a guest in a motel or a stranger to my own home. I belonged here. Nora called that afternoon. Her voice was steady, professional, but tinged with encouragement. "Tom, the lien and the forged documents mean the court will recognize your ownership. We'll move forward with restoring everything in your name." I thanked her, realizing that for years I had let Evan handle the numbers, the papers, the so-called future. Now, I was taking the wheel back. Even in my late 60s, I wasn't done steering my own life. Walking through the cabin, I ran my fingers across the old workbench by the window. Dust clung to my palm, but beneath it was the same smooth wood I had sanded long ago. I thought about what it could be, a place not just for me, but for others. I imagined young hands, awkward with tools, learning the patience of a steady cut. I remembered the spark in the eyes of kids I taught shop class to, and I knew then what the cabin could become: a workshop for the community, a space for teenagers to learn the craft of building something real in a world too eager to chase illusions. That vision gave me a strength I hadn't felt in months. The betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had something else to build, and that was enough. Still, family ties don't break cleanly. A letter arrived from Evan through his lawyer, short and pleading. He wanted to see me, to ask for forgiveness. The words were familiar: apologies, promises, bargains. My chest ached reading them, but I folded the paper and set it aside. I wasn't ready, not when every line still smelled of desperation more than repentance. Instead, I wrote back a single sentence: "The truth is the first step to rebuilding. Go find it yourself." That evening, while sorting through old drawers in the cabin, I came across a tin box I hadn't opened in years. Inside lay my wife's journal, bound in worn leather. I flipped through pages filled with her neat handwriting, lists of chores, sketches of garden plans, prayers whispered on long winter nights. One entry stopped me cold. "I know Tom will face choices when I'm gone. He has the heart to choose what's right, even if it hurts. I trust him to stand tall, even when others try to bend him." Her words sank into me like warm embers in the fireplace. She had trusted me even then to rise above fear and betrayal. It was as if she had written across time, reminding me that dignity was still mine to hold. The next morning, I stood in the cabin, with the windows open, letting the icy wind sweep through. The lake outside was frozen solid, the surface reflecting pale light. I placed my hands on the workbench again and imagined the laughter of young people filling the space, sawdust dancing in sunbeams. I pictured life breathing back into walls that had nearly been lost to greed. Betrayal had nearly stripped me of everything, but here I was, standing on my own floorboards, breathing air that belonged to me. I whispered into the empty room, "Life doesn't end with betrayal. It begins again with how you rise from it." The wind carried the words, rattling the shutters, but inside me there was a calm resolve. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning, building, starting again. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt something close to peace. If you're still here and searching for how resolution might finally take shape, Write number 6 in the comments to let me know you're on this journey too. Now, let's move into point number 7. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a place where lives were dismantled in neat rows of testimony. I sat on a wooden bench near the back, hands clasped, heart beating slow but heavy. When Evan was brought in, dressed in the county's plain clothes instead of the tailored suits he once flaunted, he looked smaller somehow. The arrogance had drained from his shoulders, replaced by a slump that spoke of nights without sleep. Ivy trailed behind him, pale and nervous, her once perfect posture bent under the weight of shame. The prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece: forged signatures, fraudulent deeds, falsified accounts. The judge's voice remained calm, measured, as though reading from a script he had performed 1,000 times. But for me, every word landed like a hammer on wood, shaping the framework of what was left of my family. Evan's attorney whispered frantically, but eventually my son rose, his voice breaking as he admitted guilt. He pled to fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Hearing those words come out of his mouth was worse than any insult he had ever thrown at me. Ivy, on the other hand, struck a bargain. She had agreed to testify against Evan, providing documents and emails that proved she knew more than she admitted. Her cooperation earned her leniency, but it also stripped away the last of her composure. She looked at me once from across the room, eyes pleading for something I no longer had to give. When the gavel fell, it was not with triumph, but with finality. The deal was dead. The much-lauded $18 million evaporated as Martin Decker withdrew his backing. Newspapers wasted no time. By evening, headlines screamed, "Holiday fraud case, family betrayal at Christmas." Their names, once dressed in hopeful ambition, were now shackled to disgrace. After the hearing, I was called forward. The judge confirmed what Nora had fought for. The cabin and the home were mine once more. Every fraudulent deed voided. Every false transfer erased. I signed the restoration papers with a hand steadier than I expected. It wasn't joy that filled me, but a sober relief, like a carpenter inspecting a repaired beam and finding it sound again. Later, in a small visitation room with cinder-block walls and a scratched table, Evan asked to see me. He entered, escorted by a deputy, but the moment the door closed, he fell to his knees before I could say a word. His tears hit the floor, his voice ragged. "Dad, I'm sorry. I lost myself. I thought money could fix everything. Please, forgive me. Please believe I can change." I stood still, the image of my son at my feet clashing with memories of him as a boy tugging my hand, begging me to teach him how to sand a board. My throat tightened. I wanted to reach for him, but the years of lies and the sting of betrayal held me back. "Forgiveness isn't a deal you strike in a moment, Evan," I said finally. My voice echoed against the bare walls. "It's a road you'll have to walk, step by step. I can't walk it for you. I can't erase what you chose to do." He sobbed harder, clutching his hands together like a penitent at the altar. For the first time, I believed he might understand the depth of what he had lost. But I also knew it wasn't my role to carry him across the distance. When the deputy returned, Evan looked up at me, eyes red and desperate. I gave him one last nod, neither promise nor rejection, just acknowledgement of the blood tie we could not sever. Then I turned and walked out, the door clanging shut behind me. That evening I drove back to the cabin. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped inside. The place felt different now, lighter somehow. I opened the windows to let in the pale light of a winter sunset, watched it fall across the floorboards. Outside, the lake was frozen, a mirror of silver stretching into the horizon. I set my hand on the workbench, feeling the solid grain beneath my palm. For the first time in months, I felt steady, rooted in something that no betrayal could take away. The cabin was mine again, but more importantly, so was my life. I whispered into the stillness, "I lost a son to greed, but I found myself in the truth. That's the price and the salvation." The words lingered in the cold air, a carpenter's final measurement before cutting the next piece of wood. The cabin was quiet that morning, sunlight spilling across the floorboards in long golden beams. I sat at the workbench with a mug of coffee, breathing in the scent of pine and sawdust. For the first time in a long while, I felt no rush of panic, no weight pressing on my chest. The storm had passed. My son's betrayal, the legal battles, the humiliation of Christmas Eve, it was all behind me now, though the scars would remain. What I had left was this space, this land, and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat reminding me I was still here. I thought about the journey that had carried me from the motel's flickering lights to this reclaimed home. At first, I had wanted only survival, to claw back what was taken. But as each step unfolded, I discovered something deeper. I wasn't fighting just for a house or a cabin. I was fighting for the right to exist with dignity. Money had blinded my son, turned him into someone who measured life in shares and returns. In the process, he had forgotten the hands that built his first crib, the roof that kept him safe. Family, I realized, cannot be defined by blood alone. Blood ties can betray you, twist into shackles when poisoned by greed. True family is found in those who hold you up when you falter, who protect instead of prey. I had seen that in Nora, in Pastor Jim, even in Deputy Ruiz, who treated my case as more than paperwork. They became my family in ways my own son could not. Greed has a way of corroding love. I watched it strip the soul from my boy, watched it gnaw through marriage vows until even Ivy turned against him in the open street. If there is any lesson in all of this, it is that wealth without character is nothing more than sand built into castles. The tide will come and it will wash everything away, but respect, honesty, and dignity, those are stones you can build a life upon. I thought ahead to the future of this cabin. It would not be just my refuge. I would open it to the young, the restless kids who needed a place to learn something real. Here, they could feel the heft of wood in their hands, smell the clean bite of fresh sawdust, and discover that building is more than hammering nails. It is shaping a life. Above the workbench, I planned to carve words into a wooden sign. Wealth cannot hold a family together. Character can build a community. Those words would outlast me. On the shelf behind me, a small carving caught the light. It was the project I had finished the night before, a flame etched into oak, polished until it gleamed. To me, it represented the fire within, the kind that betrayal cannot smother. I placed it where the morning sun struck it, so every day would begin with that reminder. No matter how cold the season, the flame endures. As I stood by the window, I saw the lake beginning to thaw at the edges, the first cracks of spring creeping across the ice. It reminded me that no winter lasts forever. Beneath even the thickest sheet of ice, life waits, patient and unbroken. My own life, fractured by betrayal, was shifting toward renewal. I whispered into the morning stillness, words meant not only for myself, but for anyone who might one day face what I had faced. If you've been betrayed by your own blood, remember this. Your worth isn't defined by their choices. It is defined by how you carry yourself forward. Dignity is the inheritance no one can steal. I let the words settle into the silence of the cabin, then turned back to the workbench. There were boards to plane, projects to sketch, a future to build. My son's path was now his to walk, tangled in courts and consequences. Mine was here, under the steady light, shaping wood into something useful, shaping pain into something that might help others. The sun climbed higher, pouring light through the open windows. I stood tall in that glow, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a man reborn from it. In the end, what remains after storms of betrayal and seasons of loss is not the shadow of what was taken, but the light of what we choose to build from the ruins. Life teaches us that the collapse of trust can be as devastating as the collapse of walls, yet both offer an opening, a chance to rebuild stronger, truer, and more resilient than before. The measure of a life is never the wealth acquired or the applause of a crowd. It is the quiet strength to stand after being broken, to rise from ashes with dignity intact. There is a truth that becomes clearer with age, a truth often learned through pain. It is that family is not always defined by blood. Family is defined by respect, by the protection we extend when others are vulnerable, by the care we offer when no one else is watching. When betrayal comes from those closest to us, it cuts the deepest. But it also awakens the realization that worth is not dependent on their choices. Worth is carved from the integrity we refuse to surrender. We live in a world where money dazzles, where titles and possessions promise security. Yet history and experience remind us that greed corrodes, ambition without conscience destroys, and love rooted in condition will eventually fracture. What endures is not what we own, but who we become when ownership is stripped away. The dignity to say, "I will not be erased," the courage to face down lies with truth. These are the treasures no thief can steal, no betrayal can corrupt. Every ending is also a beginning. What looks like a collapse may in truth be a foundation newly exposed, waiting for us to build differently, wisely, with clearer eyes. The seasons shift. Ice gives way to thaw. Winter cannot hold forever. So it is with the soul. Betrayal may freeze us in shock, but beneath that frozen surface life stirs, ready to rise into spring. Healing begins not when others change, but when we take back the power to define who we are and what we stand for. To anyone listening who has faced their own storm of disappointment, who has felt the sting of being cast aside or diminished, know that your story does not end there. The truest act of defiance is to keep walking, to keep building, to keep believing that dignity and truth matter more than approval or inheritance. You cannot control the actions of others, but you can always choose the ground on which you stand. And when you choose the ground of integrity, you discover it is unshakable. The lesson is timeless. Wealth may crumble, reputations may fall, but character, tested and refined, becomes the lasting legacy. When the world strips away illusions, you learn that the best revenge is not retaliation. The best revenge is becoming everything you were told you could not be, living fully, freely, and without fear. In that way, betrayal becomes a strange gift, forcing us to reclaim the parts of ourselves long buried under compromise. As we close this journey together, let these reflections stay with you. Trust is precious, give it wisely. Dignity is priceless, never surrender it. Healing is possible, choose it daily. Now, if this story resonated with you, if it stirred something within your own heart, take a moment to share your thoughts. We want to hear your voice, because your perspective matters. Have you ever faced betrayal and found the strength to rise again? Have you discovered lessons in pain that shape the person you are today? Share your experience in the comments. Your words may be the encouragement someone else desperately needs. And if you found value here, if you want to continue exploring stories that reflect the struggles, resilience, and quiet victories of ordinary lives, please subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you are not only supporting the creation of meaningful content, you are also joining a community that believes in truth, redemption, and the courage to stand tall when the world tries to press us down. We put our hearts into every story we share, not to entertain with fleeting drama, but to offer windows of reflection, mirrors of human experience, and sparks of hope. By liking, commenting, and subscribing, you help ensure that these stories reach more people who might need them. You help create a circle of voices where no one feels alone in their trials. So, as we close this chapter, I extend my gratitude to you. Thank you for listening, for opening your heart, for allowing this story to walk alongside your own for a little while. May you leave not with heaviness, but with clarity and the quiet conviction that no matter the betrayal, no matter the loss, you carry within you the strength to begin again. Stand tall, build anew, guard your dignity as the priceless inheritance it is, and remember, even in the coldest winter, the fire within you can light the path forward. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.